You feel the cold first, not as a sensation, but as an absence. The absence of warmth, of softness, of anything that once meant home. The air here doesn't move like air should move. It hangs, suspended, crystalline. Each breath you take feeling like swallowing glass shards that scrape the inside of your throat raw. This is Kolyma, northeastern Siberia, where winter temperatures plunge to minus 50 degrees Celsius, where the permafrost runs 300 meters deep into the Earth's frozen heart, where the very ground beneath your boots has not thawed since the last ice age ended 10,000 years ago. The forest around you is silent, not the peaceful silence of a summer meadow, but the silence of a tomb sealed shut. The larch trees stand like skeletal sentinels, their bare branches clawing at the colorless sky, their bark blackened by frostbite and decades of neglect. The snow is not white here, it's gray, ash gray, the color of despair, crystallized and scattered across the landscape like the remnants of burned letters, burned dreams, burned lives. The wind, when it comes, is a serrated blade that finds every gap in your threadbare coat, every crack in your worn leather boots, every vulnerable inch of exposed skin on your weathered face. Your name is Alexei, 45 years old, though you feel centuries older on mornings like this. You were a woodcutter once, in another life, in a small village 2,000 kilometers west of here, where the birch trees grew tall and straight, where your daughter's laughter echoed through summer evenings like church bells calling the faithful home. You remember the weight of an axe in your calloused hands, the satisfying crack of wood splitting clean along the grain, the smell of pine sap sticky on your fingers. You remember your wife's hands kneading bread dough in the kitchen, her humming filling the spaces between the crackling of the fire in the stove. But that was before the war, before the purges, before the quotas and the accusations and the midnight knock on the door that changed everything. Now you stand here, not as a prisoner, but as something perhaps worse, a guard at Sevastlag, one of the dozens of labor camps scattered across this frozen wasteland like dark stars in a constellation of suffering. The year is 1943, and the Great Patriotic War rages 3,000 kilometers to the west, consuming men and metal and hope in equal measure. You watch the prisoners shuffle past in the pre-dawn darkness, their faces hollow as carved masks, their eyes reflecting nothing but the dim glow of the guard tower lights. Among them are children, 12, 13, 14 years old, some of them orphans of executed enemies of the state, some of them guilty only of being born to the wrong parents, of carrying the wrong names, of existing in the wrong place at the wrong time. They move like ghosts through the snow, their small frames disappearing inside oversized prison jackets, their feet wrapped in rags because there are never enough boots, never enough food, never enough mercy. The cold settles deeper into your bones, and you feel the weight of the rifle slung across your shoulder. 7 pounds of wood and steel that feels heavier than any axe you ever carried, heavier than anything you've ever known.
You learned quickly that time moves differently here. Not in hours or minutes, but in breaths, in heartbeats, in the number of times you can clench your fists inside your gloves before the feeling disappears entirely. The sun, when it deigns to show itself at all during these winter months, crawls across the southern horizon like a dying animal, never rising more than a few degrees above the tree line, casting long shadows that stretch across the camp like accusing fingers pointing at everyone and no one. Your duty begins at 4 in the morning, the darkness so complete it feels solid, tangible, something you could reach out and touch. You stand at the gates as the work brigades form, watching the guards count heads, recount them, check their lists with fingers so cold they can barely grip the pencils. The prisoners receive their rations, 300 grams of black bread that's more sawdust than grain, a ladle of soup so thin you can see the bottom of the bowl through the murky liquid, perhaps a sliver of salted fish if the supplies have arrived from Magadan, the port city 800 kilometers to the south. The children receive the same rations as the adults, the same impossible expectations, the same 12-hour shifts in the gold mines 20 kilometers north, or in the logging camps where the frozen wood shatters like ceramic under the axe blades, or in the stone quarries where the granite is hard as iron and just as unforgiving. You watch a boy, maybe 13, stumble under the weight of the tools he's been assigned to carry. His name is Dmitri, or perhaps it's Mikhail, or perhaps it doesn't matter anymore, because names here are like snowflakes, distinct for a moment before they melt into the anonymous mass of suffering. You should report him for malingering. That's what the regulations demand, what your training insisted upon, what survival in this position requires. But you remember your own daughter, Anna, who would be 15 now if she's still alive, if the typhus didn't take her during that last terrible winter before you left, if your wife managed to keep her fed on the rations allowed to families of camp guards. You remember teaching Anna to split kindling, her small hands wrapped around the hatchet handle, your larger hands guiding hers, showing her the angle, the rhythm, the patience required. Instead of reporting the boy, you look away. You light a cigarette, even though your ration of tobacco is precious, even though each one represents a currency more valuable than rubles here. The gesture costs you nothing, but in this place, nothing is everything. The camp commandant, Major Volkov, is a man whose face has forgotten how to form expressions beyond contempt and suspicion. He walks the compound each morning at precisely 6 o'clock, his boots crunching through the snow with mechanical precision, his eyes scanning for infractions, for weakness, for opportunities to meet his quotas of disciplinary actions. You've learned to stand at attention with your spine straight as the larch trees, your face as expressionless as the permafrost, your thoughts buried deeper than any gold vein in these cursed mountains. You've learned that kindness here is a dangerous luxury, that mercy is a commodity that can get you reassigned to the other side of the fence, and that the distance between guard and prisoner is measured in millimeters, not meters, and that distance narrows with every act of humanity you allow yourself. But at night, in the barracks you share with 11 other guards, when the vodka has loosened tongues and dimmed memories, you lie awake on your narrow bunk and calculate. You calculate how many extra bread rations you might divert. You calculate which record keepers might be bribed. You calculate the weight of a child's life against the weight of your own. The wind howls outside, a wolf song of hunger and endless winter, and you close your eyes against calculations that have no good answers.
You discover the truth on a Tuesday. Though the days here bleed together like watercolors left in the rain,
making such distinctions feel arbitrary, almost absurd. The transport has arrived from Magadan, 3 trucks struggling through the ice-packed road that winds through the mountains like a scar across flesh that refuses to heal. The temperature has dropped to minus 48 degrees Celsius, cold enough that the diesel fuel has begun to gel, cold enough that the metal of your rifle burns your skin if you touch it with bare hands, cold enough that spit freezes before it hits the ground. They unload the new prisoners in the central yard, and among them you see faces that shouldn't exist here. 23 children, ranging from ages 8 to 15, their papers stamped with Article 58, counter-revolutionary activities, though their only crime is being born to parents already swallowed by the machinery of the state. A girl with braids the color of wheat straw stands shivering in a coat 3 sizes too large. A boy with glasses held together with wire clutches a small bundle to his chest like it contains everything he has left of the world before. Twins, impossible to tell if they're boys or girls beneath the layers of rags, hold hands with a grip that suggests they fear separation more than death itself. You know the statistics because the guards discuss them over their evening card games with the casual detachment of men discussing livestock. Children survive an average of 3 months in the Kolyma camps during winter. The work quotas don't adjust for size or age. The rations don't increase for growing bodies. The cold doesn't discriminate. By spring, when the thaw finally comes and the ground softens enough to dig graves, most of these small faces will be gone, replaced by wooden markers that the next winter will topple and erase.
You move the children like shadows, one at a time, sometimes 2 if the circumstances align with the precision required. The system you've constructed is fragile as spun glass, dependent on Yuri's drunken complicity, on the rotation schedules you've memorized down to the minute, on the brutally cold nights when even the most vigilant guards retreat into the warmth of their stations rather than patrol the perimeter with the dedication regulations demand. Each extraction is a calculation written in lives, yours, theirs, everyone's. The route you use winds through the forest to a village called Yogodnoye, 47 kilometers southwest, where a woman named Vera runs what the locals call an orphanage, but what functions more as a way station for the forgotten and the disappeared. She's the widow of a geologist who died in the camps in 1938, and she asks no questions when small figures appear at her door in the darkness, their feet wrapped in stolen felt, their faces hollow with cold and terror, and the kind of exhaustion that comes from running for your life through a landscape designed to kill you. You lead them yourself on the first 3 journeys because trust is a currency these children have no reason to possess.
because the forest at night is a labyrinth of death where a single wrong turn means freezing before dawn. Because you need to see with your own eyes that the route works, that the mathematics of mercy can sometimes add up to survival. The temperature during these midnight evacuations hovers between -35 and -42 degrees Celsius, cold enough that your breath forms ice crystals in your beard, cold enough that the snow beneath your feet squeaks like broken glass with each step. Katya is the first, then the boy with the wire-rimmed glasses, whose name is Pavel, and who hasn't spoken a word since his mother was shot in front of him 6 months ago. Then the twins, Sergei and Svetlana, who cling to each other even in sleep, even in the moments of greatest danger. You wrap them in blankets stolen from the supply depot. You feed them bread you've saved from your own rations until your ribs begin to show and the other guards notice you've grown gaunt. You teach them to walk without sound, to breathe shallow and quiet, to become ghosts before they become corpses. But the system is not perfect. No system built on deception and theft and the exploitation of bureaucratic chaos can ever be perfect. On the 14th extraction, a boy named Leonid, who's 13 and small for his age and suffering from the early stages of scurvy, you encounter a patrol you didn't anticipate. 2 guards, Borodin and Kursk, emerging from the tree line with rifles and flashlights and questions that have no good answers. You stand there in the darkness, Leonid pressed against your side, trembling, not just from cold, but from the understanding that this moment is the razor's edge between continuation and ending. Borodin is young, maybe 22, new to the camps, and still possessed of the kind of ideological certainty that hasn't yet been eroded by reality. Kursk is older, a veteran who's seen enough to know that official truth and actual truth rarely occupy the same space. You make a choice, the only choice available. You tell them the truth. Not all of it, but enough. You tell them about the children dying at rates that make even the stated quotas impossible to meet. You tell them about the telegrams from Moscow demanding certain numbers while simultaneously cutting food supplies. You tell them that you have a daughter, that they might have daughters, that somewhere in this vast machinery of suffering there has to be a place where the gears don't grind quite so fine. Borodin raises his rifle, his young face twisted with confusion and something like fear, because uncertainty is more dangerous here than any certainty, even terrible certainty. But Kursk, he places a hand on Borodin's arm, gently, the way you might calm a frightened horse. He looks at you for a long moment, his eyes reflecting the beam of his flashlight like twin moons. And then he looks at Leonid, at this shivering child who represents everything wrong with a system that devours its own future. Kursk nods once, turns off his flashlight, and walks away into the darkness, pulling Borodin with him. You hear them arguing in hushed voices that fade into the forest, and you know that you've just recruited 2 more conspirators, willing or not, into a network of silence that grows more dangerous with each person who knows. By March of 1944, you've moved 37 children, and you've lost 3 pounds for every life saved, and you sleep 2 hours a night, and the cold has become something you no longer feel, because you have become cold yourself, frozen on the inside where it matters.
You stand in the same spot where this began, 15 months later, though the man standing here now barely recognizes the man who first calculated the weight of a child's life against the machinery of indifference. The war has ended, victory declared in May of 1945, and the news arrived here 3 weeks late,
carried on the same trucks that bring supplies and take away gold, as if triumph and suffering operate on different calendars in this corner of the world. The prisoners celebrated quietly, a subdued recognition that for them, one war ending simply means another continues. The final count is 63. 63 children who should have died here, whose bones should have joined the uncounted thousands already beneath the permafrost, whose names should have been swallowed by the same administrative void that consumed their parents. Instead, they live, scattered across Siberia in orphanages and foster homes and small villages where questions aren't asked about children who appear with no history, no papers, no past beyond what can be invented. You've been reassigned, not as punishment, because no one knows what you've done, but as part of the routine shuffling that prevents guards from growing too familiar with their posts, too comfortable, too human. You're being sent west, to a camp outside Perm, 4,000 kilometers closer to the life you left behind, though you understand now that you can never go back to that life, that the distance isn't measured in kilometers, but in the space between who you were and who you've become. On your last night, Kursk finds you smoking outside the barracks, the summer air almost warm at a balmy -5 degrees Celsius, the sun hanging in the sky even at midnight in that strange polar twilight that turns the world silver and gold. He doesn't speak for a long time, just stands beside you, watching his breath form small clouds that dissipate into the vastness. Finally, he tells you that Borodin reported you 3 months ago, filed a formal complaint with detailed accusations. He tells you that Major Volkov received the report, read it carefully, then burned it in his office stove and told Borodin that if he ever filed such slanderous accusations against a loyal guard again, he'd find himself on the other side of the fence. You don't know what this means, whether Volkov knew and approved, whether he knew and simply chose the path of least disruption, whether the system itself is so broken that even its enforcers sometimes need to believe in small mercies to survive their own complicity. You suspect you'll never know, that this ambiguity is the closest thing to absolution you'll receive. The trains take you west through landscapes that slowly transform, the permafrost giving way to regular earth, the skeletal larches replaced by forests that know seasons beyond endless winter and brief summer. You carry no photographs, no letters, no evidence of what transpired. The only proof exists in the scattered lives of children who will grow up never knowing the name Alexei, never knowing that a guard in a camp whose name they've tried to forget made calculations that favored their lives over his safety. You think about Anna, who you learned died of typhus in the winter of 1943, while you were saving other people's daughters. Your wife's letter reached you 4 months after the burial, the paper thin as hope, the words economical because postage is expensive and grief is a luxury. You wonder if the universe keeps such accounts, if 63 saved balances against 1 lost, if mathematics can ever adequately measure love or loss or the weight of choices made in darkness. The forest outside your window blurs past, birch and pine and the green urgency of summer growth. Somewhere in Yagudnaya, Katya might be learning to read. Somewhere, Pavel might have spoken his first words in years. Somewhere, the twins might have learned it's safe to sleep without holding hands. You'll never know, because knowing would create connections, and connections create vulnerabilities, and the first rule of mercy in merciless systems is that it must be silent to survive. You are 46 years old, and you will live another 32 years working various posts, never speaking of Kalima, carrying the weight of 63 lives saved and 1 life lost, and all the impossible mathematics that fall between. The cold you felt in that place never leaves you. It settles into your bones like memory, like the permafrost that runs 300 meters deep into the Earth's frozen heart, like the silence that surrounds certain truths too dangerous to speak. The train pushes west toward whatever comes next, and you close your eyes, and in the darkness behind your eyelids you see small faces, still breathing, still walking, still carrying forward into uncertain futures the single undeniable fact that someone once calculated their lives were worth saving. And perhaps, in the end, that calculation is the only one that matters.